I don't know if that has a super deep meaning to it. He probably just did it because it's gross and weird, but he's afraid of his balls. First of all, check out the Snoopy sweatpants. Check him out. He's Joe Cool. Real Snoopy fans know about Joe Cool. Anyways, so welcome back to the Unemployed Movie Critic channel. If you have seen my videos before. If you haven't, then welcome to the Unemployed Movie Critic channel. I'm your host, Maya. So today I'm going to talk about Beau is Afraid. I saw it for the first time last week, but I was making my Wicked video first, so I couldn't make a video about it right off the dome. I know it came out a couple years ago, but I hadn't seen it until just a couple days ago, and it ultimately ended up in my favorite movies of all time list. I don't know where it ranks, but it's in there. It's in the top 30, I would say. It's very good. So I wanted to go over some of the themes that I noticed. I just wanted to yap about it because I really liked the movie. So I think it really fits in with this theme that I've been seeing of more familial familial themed films and the common themes that I see in popular media of today and kind of what that means. First, let's talk about its depiction of mental health and anxiety and being mentally unwell. I know I'm not the first person to pick up on this or talk about this, but I just wanted to mention it. So I think Beau is Afraid really captures the horror of being anxious and being scared. So in the film, everything is very disorienting and very scary to Beau. He's afraid, if you didn't know. So he thinks everything is an ultimate threat that will kill him dead. One of the most interesting things about this film is that all of Beau's fears do come to fruition. He's afraid of people breaking into his house. He's afraid of death. He's afraid of all these crazy things happening to him, and they ultimately do all happen to him. So there is no escape. I think that's, Ari Aster's kind of dark sense of humor coming out in the film. It's even more terrifying to the viewer, I think, because we almost see Beau's fears as being overblown. Beau's definitely, doesn't need to worry about leaving for a second and somebody breaking into your house. And yet that does happen to Beau. So it's seen as this ridiculous fear that he has, but they all come true. It kind of makes you fear your own imagination. If I can imagine this to happen, then it probably could. So when we think of some of the things Beau is afraid of, he's afraid of being stabbed by the naked stabber guy, the happy birthday killer, because he sees him on the news and then he does actually get stabbed by him. He's afraid of dying while having sex, which is what his mom said happened to his dad and grandpa. And then he doesn't die, but somebody dies during his very first sexual encounter ever. I think it culminates when Beau thinks he's safe at the end of the movie. It feels very freeing because he's in open water where he could go any direction, but then he just gets shuffled into the cave, which turns into the Colosseum. So even when he thinks it's over, it's not over. He is constantly afraid of death. That's kind of a recurring fear, I guess. You can kind of tie them all together with death. And he's also kind of afraid, I get the sense that he's afraid he's going to die and nobody will even care that he died, So in the beginning of the movie when he sees the people recording the man about to jump off a building, they just don't take it seriously. They kind of are laughing about it, and Beau is uncomfortable with that. He doesn't really react intensely, but I think that's what it's supposed to show us. He also asks for help from the police officer when he's trying to run away from the stabbing guy. And the police officer's like, "Get out of here. You don't hurt me. I'm going to shoot you." And I mean, hey, ain't that the truth? Ain't that just the way? So he's afraid of being shot by the police officer, even though he's just trying to ask for help in his moment of need. And in the play of his life, he almost dies a lonely old man as he searches for his family. And also, nobody seems to remember him. He spends all this time in the play, searching his whole life, and then at the end, he's all like scrunched up on the ground. Finally, he's reconnected with his family, but he is afraid that they have forgotten about him. You know what I mean? And his sons, it's a beautiful thing to him that his sons do remember him after all those years of him being gone, his sons, you know. I also found a recurring theme was like this anxiety around like peers and peer pressure. So there's a lot of that kind of feeling, especially with the younger daughter Tony, when he is captured by Grace and Roger. Their daughter Tony really puts a lot of pressure on him. There's this sense of like being very afraid to be laughed at or ridiculed or judged. And it just seems like teenagers will make fun of you for anything, you know, and as I'm sure we all know, we've all been teenagers. And as I work around with teenagers, that really is true. Like teenagers find the stupidest things like embarrassing. And I'm like, why are you embarrassed for answering a question? So Tony, the teen daughter, constantly pressures Beau to do what she tells him to do. So I feel like Tony is very accurate to like the mean teen who's kind of seems like she's mean for no good reason. But, you know, if you think about it, she's a bully because she's not really like getting the attention she needs, as, you know, hurt people, as they say. So she's kind of like the embodiment of that. And she's very accurate to the weird things that teens will be mean to each other for and like make fun of each other for. And it feels very humiliating when Beau is in those circumstances where Tony is like pressuring him to do something, even though he shouldn't feel humiliated for any of the things that he's being made fun of. So, you know, for example, Tony and her friend pressure Beau to smoke weed in the car. I don't even actually know if it's weed because Beau is really tripped out by that. And she's like, do it, or we're gonna tell everybody that you touched us. And then they record him and then just laugh at him as he's doing it, and they laugh at him as he like coughs about it. Pretty normal thing to cough smoking a giant dab of weed, but they make fun of him for that. Tony pressures him to drink paint. Tony constantly is recording him, and it's like this new kind of modern fear that like teens do be recording each other to put it on the internet to laugh at each other. So I definitely felt that feeling as well, you know, the fear of like anybody could be recorded at any time, but also teens especially will record each other and just be mean to each other about it. And to me, it kind of also ties back into OCD. So I have OCD. And so some things in the movie that kind of really reminded me of that, where whenever Tony like threatens to blackmail him with just like making something up, that's kind of an OCD thing too. The fear of like being framed is something that I have all the time. I'm always afraid like I'm gonna be framed for something that I didn't do, and then I'm gonna try really hard to prove my innocence, but nobody will believe me. OCD is a crazy disease, by the way. It's not just like, if you didn't already know, it's not just like, oh, I need to have my room organized and I need to eat the blue M&Ms and then the brown M&Ms. Like I'm afraid that I'm gonna like kill my family on accident with my mind. Anyways, I really enjoyed that aspect of the movie as well. I don't know if it was intentional, but it definitely hit the OCD bone in my body, probably because OCD and anxiety are tied together in the brain. With me, with my OCD, sometimes there's a fear of like, what if I did do something terrible and I just don't remember? And so I was kind of reminded of that in the play of Beau's life, where the narrator mentions Beau goes to this town that's like ruined by fires, and the people there accuse him of setting the town on fire, and then this guy accuses Beau of replacing his children's feet and hands, like switching the feet and hands of his children, and then he gets thrown in jail. And it's mentioned by the narrator that he sits in jail for so long he begins to wonder if he actually did do it. And so that's a fear. I'm like, what if I robbed a bank and I don't remember and they're looking for me? And he also, to kind of go back on that, he also has been searching for his family for so long, he begins to wonder if he imagined his family, if they were even real in the first place. Even in the beginning of the film, when there's notes being slid under Beau's door constantly from his neighbor, and he's like, turn down the music, asshole. And Beau was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not playing music. It's kind of that OCD fear again of like, what if I did something and I just there's something wrong with me for some reason and I don't notice that I'm doing something wrong, or I really made somebody angry and I don't know that they're angry and don't know why they're upset with me. That's kind of an OCD thing as well. He also kind of feels like he needs to be perfect for his mom. You kind of get that sense as well. And I know, at least for me, my OCD is like I need to be seen as perfect, otherwise I failed and everybody hates me. And it also, especially at the end of the movie when Beau is in the Coliseum and all of his decisions have, like, kind of throughout his whole life are being played on a big screen and being judged, and everybody, you know, it's missing context, of course, but everybody judges him for what he's done. And it kind of leads back to that feeling of like no decision you make is the right decision, and that very intense fear, which goes back to anxiety, that every decision you make could be the wrong decision. And again, that goes back to Beau's kind of need to be perfect and need to ask his mom for guidance all the time. And just the general, I guess, mental health feeling of being confused and disoriented. And, you know, sometimes when you're not doing so hot, you will be like walking around in a fugue state. Like how Walter White pretended to be when he was selling meth and got captured by Tuco and then he had to lie to Skylar. But that in real life, in your mind. You kind of lose concept of like, how did I get here? What am I doing here? Why am I doing this? You're like very foggy, and it kind of feels like how Beau's Afraid looks to me. It like chaotic. Things are happening around you. You're trying to concentrate on what's going on. And you're kind of like on that autopilot kind of feeling, you know. I know people with other mental health conditions definitely talk about that as well. Really get that sense from the film. And you really feel like Beau is definitely like, how did I get here? Especially when he's in Grace and Roger's house. He is so disoriented. How did I get here? And I think especially that's how grief works as well, which we will talk about soon. I think also relating back to mental health, when you're kind of not doing so hot, things feel a lot more intense than they are. So I definitely think the whole film is just from Beau's perspective, especially in the beginning, where everything seems really intense and really fast and really scary. I don't think his neighborhood is actually nearly that dangerous in real life in the movie world, but he's not doing well. So it seems terrifying to him. And he feels like he lives in a hellscape where he could die at any minute, because that's what the news is telling him also, that he could die at any minute. And also, I just felt like the movie really felt like, to me, as somebody who takes SSRIs, if you know, you know. SSRI girlies, rise up. Anyways, I feel like you might be familiar with like the brain zap concept, which I didn't know was a thing until I saw somebody else talk about it, and I was like, oh, that does happen to me. But for example, when you first start taking an SSRI medication, or like me, if you forget to order it and you've been off it for a couple days, you get the brain zaps and you just like hit all of a sudden, you're like, ugh. And I feel very off balanced, I get confused. Things start looking like a little, not hazy to me, but I'm just like a little dazed, and it feels like I'm really sleepy, or like I'm a little drunk almost. And it's not like I can't do things and focus on things. Like my brain's pretty fine. I'm just like confused, and you just don't feel quite right. And I feel like that's what the whole film is like. It's like you're in a walking dream, like living dream. So it kind of gives viewers a glimpse into that. I don't know what's going on with Ari Aster. I assume he's mentally unwell, like the rest of us out there. And I assume he has some issues with his mummy. The film touches on family trauma, as I'm sure all viewers were all able to pick up on. Something I wanted to note, though, is I noticed that being the favorite child seems to be a theme in some of Ari Aster's films, and I think it kind of pops up to me in this film as well. You could kind of interpret when Beau has his like twin, his evil twin that gets locked up in the attic. He is the favorite child, so he had to live up to these expectations, even though I don't think that other child ever existed. However, somebody pointed out, as I was kind of doing some research, that in his mother's eulogy, it says she is survived by her only living child, which would mean that there must have been more than one of them. So it seems like Beau is kind of the favorite child, but also you especially see the favorite child come up with Tony and her dead military brother. The army brother is definitely the favorite. The parents obsess over him even though he's not there anymore. Not to be, it's upsetting that he's dead, but he's not there anymore, and they kind of just neglect their living child for the memory of this perfect boy that they raised, you know what I mean? And it seems like Hereditary and Midsommar kind of have these themes as well. Midsommar, it's more subtle, but it's definitely something that I thought about when going back to this idea. So in all three films, Hereditary, Midsommar, and Beau is Afraid, the main characters come from this kind of nuclear family, upper middle class or rich, seemingly very perfect on the outside, who have, let's assume Beau has a sibling, more than one sibling, kind of a stereotypical nuclear family. And one of the siblings die, especially if we look at Tony in the example of Beau is Afraid. One of the siblings dies, and that plunges the family into like chaos that they just cannot return from. Danny's sister in Midsommar, she kills her family, right? So, and it's kind of implied, or it seems like she gets like a little extra attention because she's mentally not well. So Danny talks about she's worried about her sister. She's like, my sister sent me all this weird stuff. I feel like I should call her. And her boyfriend tells her that she's overreacting. But it seems like she already knows her sister needs extra care and attention. And she gives her sister extra care and attention. But where does that leave Danny? That means perhaps she's not getting enough attention from her parents because they're so focused on caring for her mentally unwell sibling. And fair. The sister's not going through good things, obviously, because she does kill herself and the family at the same time. But when she kills her parents, that plunges Danny into like a hellscape she cannot escape from. And then in Hereditary, there's a couple different ways to read it. So Charlie is the favorite of grandma, but kind of Peter is the favorite of their mom, Annie, because Annie even mentions at a point, again, I had to do some research on this. It's been a while since I saw Hereditary, but it makes me want to watch it again. But Annie mentions to Peter that she wanted to have an abortion when she got pregnant with him because she says, I was trying to protect you. And we learned that's because grandma wanted to use Peter for her ritual all along. And Charlie was grandma's favorite. She had like this special connection to Charlie. And then in Beau is Afraid, Tony, whose older brother was killed in action, he is like a hero to their family. Also, when you think about it, even though she was a brat about it, she does have to put her life aside, Tony does, and sacrifice her own room and her own like peace for Beau, who's just a random stranger. And also just a random stranger, Jeeves, her parents dote on him like he is the best thing ever because they're trying to replace this son in their lives instead of just loving their own daughter, which ain't that just the way. When Beau comes into her house, she has to sacrifice her room, and she says to her parents, yeah, we have an empty room. Why is he not staying in the empty room? They're like, but we can't put him in our dead hero son's room. And then he also pukes on her laptop, which is not Beau's fault, but he does puke on her laptop, which I would be pissed about too as a teen. She's definitely not the favorite child, sadly, until she dies, and then her mom all of a sudden is like, oh, that's my baby. That's my baby. Yeah, I definitely think all three films, Ari Aster explores family units and how family units affect the course of our lives as individuals. Mental illness and grief is explored in all three films as well. There's a lot of motherly imagery, of course, So Grace and Roger are parental figures because they want Beau to be their son, almost in a way. In a reading of the film, although they're like secret agents. We'll get into that in a minute. Beau's mother is metaphorically with him everywhere he goes. So, he picks up the statue of the mom and baby. He cannot escape mothers and motherhood and this image of parental figures, even in the woods where he runs into that pregnant woman. She's pregnant for a reason, It just seems like being raised by his mom is something Beau can never escape. And also it kind of ties back to when you're grieving, as Beau is grieving because he thinks his mom is dead, he sees her in everything, kind of, you know? So when you are going through a hard time, it really does make you feel like they are in everything, and it's like you're getting signs and messages from things that are not really there. Another OCD trait that I have. And another kind of example of this mom presence always being constant in Beau's life, he cannot escape it, is that he takes everything his mom has said to him as like an absolute truth. He goes to her for advice. He calls her, "What should I do, Mom? When my flight got canceled, tell me what to do. Tell me what you think would be the best thing to do." He absolutely believes that he will die if he ever has sex, so he just doesn't do it because his mom told him that's what would happen. It's kind of like, it's almost like you believe like your mom when she says, "Oh, you need to eat carrots because it'll be really good for your eyes." And so your whole life you eat carrots because you think they're good for your eyes. Come to find out, carrots don't really do a lot for your eyes, type thing. You know what I'm saying? You just believe it your whole life. Also with family trauma, you get the idea that family trauma is passed down from generation to generation. So an example of this is Beau's dad died from having sex, and his mom says, and that's the way his dad died before him and his dad before him. They all just died right in the middle of doing the act. And so that is how you will die too one day. So he believes that very genetic, I guess, component to his family. And as well as his mom mentions when she's arguing with him about her being a good mom, she's like, "Well, you know, my mom wasn't easy to get along with either. My mom, you know, really could not love me the way that I needed her to love me." And the same was true with her mom. And so she's kind of making an excuse for, "Well, I'm better than them, Beau, so you should really be grateful for having me as a mother." And she's making herself the victim when Beau is trying to, he's not even really trying to confront her, but when she is confronted with being accused of being a bad mom. It also explores guilt with like talking about your parents and your upbringing, which I think is a little bit more of an old school kind of feeling. I know especially with like older adults, I've heard before that, "Well, I don't want to go to therapy and tell all these people my personal information," you know, even though the therapist, they're not going to do anything about it. Most therapists would, but not most normal therapists. So they have this feeling of like, it's, you're kind of going against your family and you're like being shameful to your family for talking about things that happened to you or complaining about your upbringing. You know, a lot of people have it worse is something people say all the time. And so it kind of puts an emphasis on this guilt of going to therapy and being truthful about how his mom made him feel. This idea kind of throughout all of the world, I think, that you are indebted to your parents, so you should be grateful for everything they did to you, and you should not complain about the things that they did to you, and that your parents have a right to be very offended with you if you criticize them. We have this weird cultural ideal about that. And so I think it goes back into that whole therapy thing, that like having the nerve to go to therapy to even talk about how you are upset is wrong of you, and it makes you an ungrateful child. It plays into this fear that sometimes you almost feel going to therapy that like, what if my therapist, like, what if everything that I said in my therapy sessions did get leaked? Who would be offended? Everybody would be offended. Therapy is supposed to be this judgment-free zone, but what if it wasn't? You know, that's scary as well. Also part of family trauma, his mom outwardly appears to the world to be a successful single mom who did it all on her own. She's ambitious and, you know, at the same time, she loves her son. At her funeral service, as we hear the recording of the funeral service and walk around her house when Beau first comes back to her house, she's got pictures of him all over the place. She's a doting mother. She did everything for her son. She wanted to give him a lavish lifestyle and spoil him. And so that's what the world thinks about it. But Beau knows that he didn't feel that love from his mom, and it kind of makes you like double guess yourself, like, well, was she really a good mom? You know, Beau was probably thinking to himself, she did do all these things for me, so that means she is a good mom and I am being ungrateful. And nobody will kind of believe Beau when he's trying to say that his mom wasn't a very nice person, because everybody in the film as we come to find out, is on his mom's side and thinks he's not a very good person. And it's kind of sick in a way, because Grace and Mona, I get the feeling that they probably do love their kids, but they are not fit to raise children. They love them in a kind of sick and twisted way, like you might love, you know, a little dog as an accessory, like a purse dog. You know, you love that they love you back and that they trust you and that they rely on you. Even if they're upset with you, they cannot help but love you, I think. And you like the way they make you appear to the outside world, but you can't actually care for them in the way that they really need to be cared for. And both mothers are very just mentally ill. They're extremely unpredictable and very emotional, and that's what makes their parentage scary. I mean, I don't think that so much appears in the film, but you definitely get that sense. I hope I don't sound like I'm talking out of my bootay, but that's just the sense that I get. All three films, as I mentioned, Ari Aster has this theme through Hereditary, Midsommar, and Beau is Afraid. And I feel like all three films have this element of fate. And so you cannot escape your fate, I feel like, is what all three films are trying to tell us. And that your fate is written in your DNA, which is a very scary concept to think about. It's a very scary concept hidden behind all these terrifying things that are happening on the screen, is that your fate is ingrained in you. So good luck trying to get out of it. So in Beau is Afraid, we can see this in a couple different ways. So first of all, in Beau's play of his life, he is literally trying to break his chains. He's chained to the stage and he has to break his chains, which is kind of, he's trying to escape his family legacy and this familial trauma by going his own way and making his own decisions for the first time. And yet he cannot escape from his destiny, which ends up just being that he does go back to his mom. His mom does make him feel like crap, and everybody else makes him feel like crap. And he never ends up being able to prove to himself that he can do something different, because he dies at the end of the film. Also with him dying in the boat, we see throughout the movie these glimpses at him in a boat in this open water. It almost looks like kind of the river Styx, which, you know, if you want to take the metaphor that death is freeing, scary thought to think about, don't think about that. But so we see this boat as his freedom. And in the end, when he finally does reach the boat and he escapes his mom's house, it feels like he's finally reaching freedom. And yet the boat is what kills him in the end. He goes to the Coliseum, the boat stops working, and it flips over and he dies. When Beau is turned over in the boat, you hear a baby crying. And to me, it feels like because he was so predetermined to die that way and he's so sealed in his fate with his family lineage, him dying is almost as natural as him being born, is kind of what I feel from that. And so I think with the opening scene of him being born, it just makes sense that from the moment he was born, it was always going to be like this. He could never, with a mother like the one that he has, he could never be anything else, which I don't think is true, but that's what the film is telling us is true. Oh, we also see this in Grace and Roger's house, where Beau is fast forwarding on the TV because Grace tells him to look at the video monitors, and he fast forwards to see his own fate. He is fated to go to his mom's house no matter what happens. He's fated to do the things that are set out on the recording, I guess you'll say. So he is set to play out the events as they were already predetermined. And his mom is kind of the one who set that fate for him, whether or not she even realizes it. She did. And Beau also really kind of plays into this self-fulfilling prophecy, you know what I mean? So the decisions he makes ultimately lead him to his own fate, even though he thinks he is escaping it by making those decisions, kind of like Oedipus, which we'll get to. But so I see the self-fulfilling prophecy, especially in the scene where Beau is in his play, the Beau play of his life. And the angel says something interesting. She says, you spent so long looking for your family and looking for somebody that you missed the opportunity to be loved. And so love from others was always out there, but you were always wandering around trying to look for it in other places that you missed it, and now it's gone. It's kind of like he spent so much time looking for his ending that he missed his ending, you know, which is also that scary OCD feeling that every decision you make could be the wrong decision. And the angel also describes his search as selfish, which it's not selfish. He was doing a good thing looking for his loved ones. That's not a selfish thing to do, but it kind of could be interpreted, because the angel says it's selfish and frames it as a wrong thing that Beau did, that I kind of get the sense from that there's nobody better than your family, you know, so you shouldn't go looking around for a new family when the one that you already have is already good, which I know is kind of like an upside down way of me explaining that, but I feel like you can interpret that as, in a way, Beau's subconscious could be telling him that he shouldn't be upset with his mom. He's not going to find anybody else better than his mom. His mom is the best person for him. We also see elements of fate in Hereditary, because no matter what Annie chose to do, her mom already set out the plans for what was going to happen with her life. And the same thing is true with Midsommar, because Dani was specifically chosen to end up where she was and be the Mayflower Queen, or whatever she's called. So let's compare Beau's Afraid to other works. I've been comparing it to Hereditary and Midsommar already, but it seems like it kind of relates back to kind of these more classical ideas about things that, again, I think are like ingrained in our society. So the first one is Oedipus. So like Oedipus, Beau is kind of told his future and he thinks that he can escape it, but him trying to escape, he just leads back to his own fate. So in Oedipus is told his future, which involves killing his dad, marrying his mom, and so he tries to escape that fate by running away from home, from his adoptive parents, who, you know, he thinks those are the parents that they're referring to, which accidentally leads him to killing his dad and marrying his mom. So like Oedipus, Beau's fate is predetermined. Beau also kills his dad by being born. You know what I'm saying? When you think about it, Beau does have sex in his mom's room, and that's something his mom revels in telling him about and scolding him about. He does have sex in his mom's bed. And his mom does talk to him a lot about sex in his youth, as we see. So not only does she tell him that his dad died right in the middle of having sex, and that's just the way it's going to be, but she also talks to him about girls. When they're on the cruise, she's like, oh, you know, you seem to have a type. And when they lay in bed together, it is kind of this creepy, unnerving feeling where she's like, well, you know, Beau, you can ask me for advice because I'm a woman, and a woman would know what another woman wants. And, you know, a man should be strong and you can be that man. That's kind of a creepy thing to say to your child when you kind of look at it in retrospect. And she also freaks out when Elaine goes into the room and she's like calling Beau dirty and gross, because Elaine's like, Beau, I'm leaving the cruise ship. My mom's mad at me. So, you know, why is she freaking out about that? They're obviously just children. So why is she calling Beau dirty and disgusting for that? And then also in the Colosseum scene where Beau's life is being played over the big screen, it's mentioned in one little clip from his life that at one of Beau's birthday parties, his friends pressure him to do a panty raid on his mom. So that's kind of tying, you know, sexuality with his mom again, even though he wasn't trying to be a bad boy. And I also think you can draw a couple parallels between this movie and the Odyssey. I think the Odyssey is probably just something that can be tied into any like hero's journey traveling story. And I'm not just saying that because it is a traveling story. It seems a little bit intentional, even though the parallels are not so easily drawn. So in the Odyssey, Odysseus is traveling home and encounters obstacles in many foreign lands. He is assumed dead by his family, and his wife and son have to move on with their lives. And also on his way home, he is captured by the goddess Calypso, who falls in love with him, and he has to escape, and eventually he's saved by this woman named Nausicaa, and he eventually returns home. So we can really see this in kind of the middle part of Beau is Afraid. So Beau's trying to return home. He's trying to go see his mom at first, and then he's trying to go to his mother's funeral. It follows a similar structure, not so much a similar theme. Odyssey is definitely uplifting and a hero's journey. Beau is definitely not a hero, and it's definitely not uplifting. But anyways, so Beau's trying to travel home. He has to travel all over in all these strange foreign lands, and he's even kidnapped once. He's kidnapped by Grace and Roger, and they fall in love with him. And then after escaping his kidnappers, basically, he runs into his Nausicaa, which is the pregnant woman in the woods, who does save him. She leads to his eventual freedom and escape, I guess. In the play of Beau's life in the middle, he is separated from his wife and children by the flood and searches for them for years, just like Odysseus does. And then Beau does eventually return home, both in the play of his life and in his actual life. But unlike Odysseus, Beau returns from his grueling journey with no reward and only ridicule in his own demise. But comparing it to other films, this is going to sound kind of random, I can see comparisons between Beau is Afraid and a film like Everything Everywhere All at Once and a film like Encanto, because they're very focused on where does your family lead you, and a kind of a nurture versus nature thing, you know? So I think this is just kind of a common trend that I've seen in films, and I think it's going to be explored more and more. I think this is going to be kind of a new thing, and I don't think it's a bad thing that other people are exploring the same concept. I just think it's interesting to show how the role of therapy, I think it's interesting to show how the role of therapy is really changing our lives in society and allowing us to think about our upbringing in a different way. So, you know, I mentioned older generations of people seem very hesitant to blame their parents for anything or talk against the family, and they very much criticize young people for complaining about their family and for being too sensitive. And you're like, oh, well, when I was growing up, we just did what our mom told us and she slapped us with the belt and we just got over it, you know. And I think our generation's very much open to exploring how that messed you up. But I also will say, working with the youth, I also think we're going almost in a too far of that other direction, where I think, you know, as somebody who's worked with a lot of different ages of students, not to sound like a jerk, and I feel like I'm that meme of like, oh, your liberal sisters boys wouldn't know nothing about this, but I feel like we're going too far in that some parents are too gentle with the gentle parenting, and now their students and their children do not have these life skills, and they don't know how to take criticism, or they don't know how to deal with any kind of frustration or anxiety. And I'm glad that we've able to talk about anxiety as somebody who has anxiety. I think we've come to a point where feeling uncomfortable in any way or having your views challenged in any way is automatically, we got to shut that down. I think we're going to fail the kids of tomorrow if we don't make them do anything that's uncomfortable for them. You're supposed to do things that are uncomfortable. But anyway, so I see that in those other films, going way back to what I was saying. But I also think, of course, Everything Everywhere All at Once and Encanto have a more sympathetic tone. The main characters want their families to understand them, and they want their parents to acknowledge and apologize for hurting them in their upbringing, though it was unintentional. And those other films definitely have this feeling that their parents really were trying their best. They really didn't have malice in the way that they brought up their children, and yet it unintentionally inflicted damage on them. It reminds me of this quote that I heard a long time ago, that every parent can't help but kind of traumatize their kid, even if they're trying to be the best parent ever. Even if they're the nicest parent ever, them being the nicest parent ever, what if they lead their kid to, in the future, not, you know, not being able to help their spouse wash the dishes because their parents never made them wash the dishes because they thought it was, not a very nice thing to make a kid do. You know what I'm saying? Random example, and I also think we see this in Jeanette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Is Dead, kind of her owning that her mom sucked. And like she talks about it in the book, how she felt really bad about thinking that for a long time, but in the end, it's true, and her mom inevitably did lead her to where she is today. Crazy book. You should really read that book. I listened to it as an audiobook. And she also has these very complex feelings about her mom. She talks about at the end, after her mom dies, that she does miss her mom sometimes, and that her mom did kind of give her this courage and charisma and this weird determination that she misses, even though ultimately her mom was not really fit to be her mom, frankly. And I think Jeanette's mom is very similar to Beau's mom as well, because both mothers seem to really deal with this untreated mental illness. They're very intense, emotional people. They very much cannot take criticism, and they, in their mind, they think they are the best loving moms. And they're like, well, I don't do this other bad thing that I could be doing, so I must be a good mom. And I don't blame Ari Aster or Jeanette McCurdy for feeling the way that they feel based on what they've told us, I guess. So my overall feelings about the film, I think it's excellent. It's one of my new favorites. It's one of the few films that I think is basically kind of perfect. I love Ari Aster's films because he loves to pour these hidden symbols in it, which I love. Even though when I watch the movie, I don't get the symbols all the time and I have to like look them up and stuff. I just think that's great and that's excellent. I really love that. I didn't notice anybody else online say it, so it makes me feel smart, that in Beau's apartment building, as he's walking out, you can see the list of side effects from his prescription written on the wall in graffiti. And I did clock that. So I thought that made me really smart. Some fun little symbols that I picked up on in the film were his dad being a big wiener and he's afraid of his own wiener. Yes, I did see his wee-wee and he has seen my no-no. So he inherited this disease from his dad, which was probably going to lead to his death, and his dad is that disease in real life. I don't know if that has a super deep meaning to it. He probably just did it because it's gross and weird, but he's afraid of his balls. So I think this is a film very much worth watching, even if you don't have problems mentally or with your family or whatever. It's just an excellent film, excellent detail. I think Ari Aster really puts his own feelings, and he was like, how do I explain this to others, this feeling that I'm feeling? And he really puts it into this whole film. He's kind of been hinting at it with his other films, I think, but this one really takes the cake. Thank you for listening to me just kind of ramble. I know this movie came out a while ago. I know I'm not saying anything probably super new, but I did want to get my thoughts out there about it. I really enjoyed this film. So thank you for taking a look at my YouTube channel again. Thank you for watching and subscribing. It's really been really interesting and fun to look at your guys' comments. So thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video.